Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things and welcome to another video. And today I wanted to do a goals check-in and talk about how my reading goals have been going in the first quarter of the year. So I know this is going up in like the middle of April, but I'm going to be counting all my statistics till the last day of March and not counting April, as this is talking about how my goals went in the first quarter. So I'm going to go through my like bigger reading goals for the year and then talk through my reading goals chart prompt thing that I use every month as well. So for 2020, I've set my Goodreads reading challenge at 100 books, but I've also given myself the personal challenge to read 150 books. The reason why I separate these out is because I read a lot of books for work that I can't track on Goodreads, or I can't always track within the year that I'm reading them. So it makes sense for me to keep a separate list as well as my Goodreads challenge. So 100 on Goodreads and 150 for the whole year is my plan. And as of the end of March, I have actually read 50 books, which is very nice and neat. And Goodreads thinks I have read 32, which means I am a third of the way through both my goals, a quarter of the way through the year. So I'm definitely ahead, which is nice. And you know, I might actually make it to reading 200 books this year, which would be the most I've ever read in a year. So we'll see what happens, but anyway, I'm pretty pleased with that figure so far. So another big goal of mine for 2020 was to read my own damn books, as the challenge is often called, and to read the books that are physically on my shelf to get my physical TBR down. So I have this jar which lives on my shelves, which has folded up on slips of paper the names of all the books that I acquired previous to Christmas 2019. So at the beginning of 2020, there were 55 book titles in this jar. There are, at the present time, at the end of March, 43, which is actually down quite a lot, possibly down more than I expected to. So 43 books now in the jar. I think my physical TBR is at something like 60 books, and only 43 of them have been on my shelf for a really long time. So my plan for this year was to get my long-term TBR, so my TBR jar, down to 20 books, and my overall TBR down to 40 books, which I seem to definitely be on the way to doing. And right now it seems quite likely that I'm not going to be buying many physical books in the next few months. So I might really manage to get my TBR down quite a lot this year. So far, it's going better than it has in previous years. And obviously April is my TBR clear out readathon, and I'm planning on reading lots of books that are on my shelves. So yeah, I might end up with a much smaller TBR, we shall see. Another of my goals for this year was to read the 6 books that have been on my physical TBR the longest, which at the beginning of 2020 I said were The Hunchback of Notre Dame, The Count of Monte Cristo, Wolf Brother, The Vor, Number 11 and the Mountains Echoed. I have now read And the Mountains Echoed, so I've read 1 of the 6, but I haven't read any more of the 6. However, I am halfway through Wolf Brother as we speak in April, so that I will definitely read in April, and 2 of the other ones as well, Number 11 and The Vor, are on my TBR for April as well. So by the end of April I hope to have read 3 out of this list. And also I did also read in March The Secret Scripture by Sebastian Barry, which wasn't on this list but should have been on this list. I've definitely had that longer than some of the other books on this list. I think I just missed it off. So yeah, I feel like I'm doing fairly well on that goal as well. So in general, I feel like I'm doing pretty well on my reading goals, and the TBR one definitely, I feel like I've read more books to my physical TBR than I thought I might have done. So that's promising, and that's good for ending the year with a slightly smaller physical TBR. In terms of my monthly reading prompts, so what I did at the beginning of 2020 was set like 8 kinds of books that I would like to read every month, and that would make my month a good reading month if I read them every month, sort of 8 prompts to fit every single month, and I have been doing quite a lot on this. I decided to change my reading goal checklist a bit from my one that I had in 2019 to make it more achievable in 2020, and I clearly did that because I've ticked off nearly everything. Basically there's one little blank space on this grid, so that's good and that pleases me. I'm glad that I have managed to have a more achievable list of goals every month and managed to tick off all the things I wanted to do, so that's really nice. So yes, as you can see, the top one is to read a Victorian book, and I have read something Victorian every month this year. So in January I read The Female Detective, which was a very interesting Victorian detective series of short stories. In February I read Hester by Margaret Oliphant, which was amazing. Possibly my favourite book of the year so far, might be. And then in March I read 3 Oscar Wilde plays, The Ideal Husband, Salome and A Florentine Tragedy. I especially enjoyed An Ideal Husband, though that was a reread, but the other 2 were interesting as well, and Oscar Wilde is a great writer. My second challenge is to read a non-Victorian classic every month. I feel like I've been doing pretty well at this. I have read a non-Victorian classic every month. So in January I read Hercule Poirot's Christmas, which was really enjoyable, as all Agatha Christie is, and Madame Bovary, which I will be honest, I hated. I did not like that that at all. Definitely not for me, but there we go. In February, I read A Passage to India by Ian Forster, which was a wonderful novel that I really, really enjoyed. Ian Forster is such a great writer. And then in March, I actually read 3 non-Victorian classics. I read Dubliners by James Joyce, which was not really for me. I read Queen Lucia by E.F. Benson, which was an amazing 1920s social comedy, which was fantastic. And I also read The Big Four by Agatha Christie, which was really enjoyable too. So I feel like I'm doing very well on paper on the non-Victorian classics. However, I am aware that 5 out of the 6 non-Victorian classics I've read so far this year were early to mid 20th century English or Irish classics, which is like my second comfort zone after Victorian literature. So I do feel like I'm obeying the law of this prompt, but not the spirit. So I think I need to read some non-Victorian classics which are a bit further away from the Victorian period in the rest of the year. But still, I'm feeling pretty happy, and also the 2 months when I read an Agatha Christie, I also read another non-Victorian classic. One thing I did think when I was setting up this challenge is that I do read quite a lot of Agatha Christie, and I probably will read like 6 or 7 Agatha Christies this year. I don't want Agatha Christie to tick all of those prompts when Agatha Christie is definitely within my classics comfort zone. So I am glad that I've read the non-Victorian classics that I've read, but I would like to try and read some more varied non-Victorian classics in the rest of the year. I've also read quite a lot of historical fiction. You can see lots of ticks and times numbers on my chart, though somewhat messily because I end up like writing ×2 and then I read another one and then I try and write over it, and it's not really, it's fine. I'm finding it interesting both how much historical fiction I read. I always sort of say like historical fiction is my favourite like area of fiction after classics, but actually I probably read more historical fiction because it's contemporary and they tend to be quicker and also shorter than a lot of the classics I really love. So I'm not surprised that I read that much historical fiction. I have also found it interesting doing this chart, working out what I count as historical fiction and what I don't. So for example, in January I read The Lie by Helen Dunmore, which is completely historical fiction. It's a novel set in the 1920s, nothing non-historical about it. I definitely know I can tick off that. But I also read in January And the Mountain that Echoed by Carlo Tusini, and some of that is contemporary, but quite a few of the stories within it are set in the past, so I don't know if I count that as historical fiction or not. I don't think I did, but I'm not sure if I should. That was an absolutely amazing read, and probably like tied with Hester as my favourite book of the year so far. Then in February I read 3 historical novels. I read The Illumination of Ursula Flight, which was set in the 17th century and I really enjoyed. I also read Birdcage Walk by Helen Dunmore, which is fantastic, and also Miss Austen by Jill Hornby, which is a wonderful novel about Jane Austen's sister Cassandra, which was just incredible. So that was great. And then in March I also read quite a lot of historical fiction. I read Dark Water by Elizabeth Lowry, which was great. I read The Secret Scripture by Sebastian Barry, although actually that's another one that is like dual narrative, past and present, so I think I count it as a historical novel because like more than half of it is set in the past, but obviously some of it is set in the present. The Thousand Autumns of Jacob de Zoet by David Mitchell, which is another great historical novel set in 18th century Japan. And then I also read The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstein. That's another one I'm actually not sure whether or not I should count as a historical novel because it is very magical and it is sort of fantastical and almost fantasy. Like the magic is a pretty big element that I don't think is just magic realist, but also the fact that it's like in the late 19th century is quite important to it as a story and as a book, so I feel like it belongs in historical fiction. Then I've also managed to read a commercial women's fiction novel every month. In January I read Don't You Forget About Me by Valerie McFarlane, which was wonderful, just a really fantastically fun rom-com. In February I read Evening Class by Maeve Binchy, which I loved. This was a wonderful book, like really cleverly done, with all of these interweaving stories of these various different characters in Dublin, like brought together by an evening class. Really loved it. And then in March I read After the End by Claire Mackintosh, which I did like, but I think I prefer the first half of it to the second. I'm enjoying doing this prompt so far, and definitely the first 2 books I read for this prompt were amazing, so looking forward to reading some more commercial women's fiction as the year goes on. I have also been picking something out of my TBR jar every month. In January I picked out The Victorian Lady's Guide to Fashion and Beauty, which was a interesting non-fiction book. I'm not sure it was quite what I hoped it would be, but it was still really interesting. In February I picked out Ethereal Worlds, which is a short story collection which I didn't really get on with and have already given to a charity shop. And then in March I read Dark Water by Elizabeth Lowry, which I already mentioned as one of my historical novels for that month. I am allowing myself to use things for multiple challenges, and that was a really great read. Obviously I've read 3 books that I have like picked out of my TBR jar, but I have been like going through my jar and taking out books that I have already read, because I have been reading books that are on my shelves and happen to be in there, which is why the number is so much lower than it was when I started the year, though I've only picked 3 slips out, if that makes sense. I also set out to try and do a buddy read every month. In January I buddy read Madame Bovary with Marissa from Blatantly Bookish and Jenny from Bookish Shenanigans, and then in February I buddy read A Passage to India with Claudia from Spencer's Library and Marissa from Blatantly Bookish. So it was definitely nice to buddy read those books with other booktubers, especially Madame Bovary, because none of us really liked it, and I was very glad to have some company and not liking it because it's so well regarded. I didn't manage to do a buddy read in March in the end, but hopefully I'll do one in April. Then finally I am also trying to read a review copy every month. In January I read a Japanese translated novel called Earthlings, which was very weird, and also The Victorian Lady's Guide to Fashion and Beauty, which I picked out in my TBR jar. In January was also a review copy. In February I read Miss Austen by Jill Hornby, which I was also sent for review and was absolutely amazing. And then in March I read Dark Water by Elizabeth Lowry and After the End by Claire Mackintosh. Both of those have been sent to me for review. After the End by the publisher and Dark Water by the Walter Scott Prize last year when it was longlisted. So yeah, I feel like I'm doing slightly better at reading the review copies on my shelf. I do still have a couple of review copies that have been there for a while, but hopefully I'll get to them soon. And then finally I have my like free choice prompt to tick off every month for the things that don't fit into any other category. So in January the only thing that didn't fit into any other category was The Etymologicon by Mark Forsyth, which is a non-fiction book about the history of words. And then in February the only book that didn't fit into any other category was The Horologicon by Mark Forsyth, which was a non-fiction book about words that no longer exist anymore, which was much less good than The Etymologicon and a bit of a disappointment. And then in March there were a couple of books that didn't fit into any other categories, which were Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb, and then the 2 Diana Wynne Jones books I read, Charmed Life and The Magicians of Caprona, which are both middle grade fantasy books that were really good fun. So I have ticked off nearly everything so far this year, which slightly surprises me and is also very nice. In April, obviously I'm doing my TBR Clear Out Readathon, so I don't know that I will tick off everything because my main focus will be reading the books on my shelves. I mean, my like TBR jar pick will have a tick and times however many books I read of the ones I picked out of my jar and my TBR, so probably quite a lot. But everything else I don't know. I am listening to Our Mutual Friend on audiobook at the moment, but if I don't finish that in April, I won't finish any Victorian books in April, so I won't tick off that, but we will see. I have a different focus this month, as I will in July and October when it's Jane Austen July and Victober, so that's fine by me. I feel like I've done well in my goals so far and I'm feeling pretty pleased with that. I've read a lot in the first third of the year, so hopefully I will continue to read a lot in the rest of the year. Let me know how your reading goals are going, and if they have changed at all or developed since the beginning of the year. And that's all. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.